What's up, everybody, and welcome back to my studio. I'm Joseph Finchum, you are you, and today I'm going to be trying to work in Cinema 4D to make the cover photo for the February challenge. I had the idea, and I tried to do it with some things that I had, quickly found out I didn't have enough to do what I was envisioning in my head, so I'm going to try and recreate what I was going to do in Cinema 4D. So let's get into it. So I'm starting off this project with a simple object. I then give it a few more segments to make it a little more solid so that when I do the fillet, it comes out a tiny bit thinner. The object I'm making here is a regular six-sided die. I make a sphere and size it down to become the size of a dot, and I simply start moving them around to put them where I need them to be. I know which ones go where because I can do simple arithmetic and count to 7. I take my time and I work on getting the dots placed exactly where I want them. If it's going to look like a die, the dots have to be symmetrically placed with each other and with the sides of the die. After I have a few done, I move them around to set the depth of the dimples that will be on the finished die. Most of the time I'm actually just copying the assets and moving them around. So one of the good things about working digitally is you don't have to draw or create a new thing every time you want to add something. You just copy and paste it, and then you can do with the new copies whatever you want. I'm actually making a mistake right here that I'll notice later, but we'll get to that when it comes up. As you can see, I'm getting closer to finished, and all I'm really doing is moving and changing the assets I have. It's actually a really simple program to use. I'm no expert at all, obviously. But if I can envision it, I can usually figure out a way to do it. Once I have all the dots where I need them, that was another mistake I made right there. If you were paying attention, you may have seen that instead of copying the 2 dots to bring it over and try and make the 3 dots, I actually moved the original 2 dots without copying them, and I had to go back and fix that. I'm using the wire view in order to see the depth of objects, because the wire view lets you see through everything. It has no shading to it, like the main perspective view does. The wireframe diagrams also, they can be moved around, but they're always going to be in their fixed location. So the top view is always the top view, the right view is always the right view. While in the perspective view, you can move it around wherever you want. Once I have all the dots positioned, I put them into a null, which is basically like a folder. You put all the files in one folder, and now that folder acts like all of the objects that are in it. And then I add a bool to the object. A bool allows you to, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, B-O-O-L-E, I think it's bool. but a bool allows you to cut objects from the original object. And I do it wrong a couple times because there are ways to layer things to make them do what you want it to do. The first time I did it, it removed the main structure of the die instead of the dots. The second time I did it, it removed the part of the dots that were connecting to the main structure of the die, and then flipping them around one more time, it removed the circles from the base structure, giving me the dots. I then went into the material manager and got a bunch of different materials that I want to use for the coloring of the die. I'm using only red, black, and white, and the colors I chose weren't giving me the look I wanted. I wanted them to look more like plastic dye, and these looked, I don't know, the colors seemed off, probably because the materials were modeled after glossy car paints, and so they were reflecting a little too much. When I lit them up in the scene, there was nothing around to shine light onto them. So adding the light left it kind of black and reflecting only the space above, which at this point has nothing in it. So I added the floor, which lit up the sides a lot better, but it still left the tops black and hard to see. So to correct for that, I added a sky to my scene, which is basically just saying there's something up there that's a solid color and not pitch blackness, which allows something to reflect on the top surface of the die and makes them look the way I want them to. Because the colors didn't work right, or didn't look right to me, I swapped them out with some other colors, a more of a plastic color. You'll see that on the screen that the one I chose is actually green, but then I just changed the color to whatever I wanted, which was red, black, and white. I then used those to color each individual die, and I made the 3 die by simply copying the one that I had completed. To make the flip side of the die, because I'm going to be using mostly ones on the surfaces and 6s on the surfaces, I simply flipped over the die and moved it out to where I could see it, but the mistake that I made earlier that I told you about is in the 6. It took me a while to figure it out because, like I said, I'm no expert with this program. But what I had to do was I actually had to shrink each of the dots down a little bit, because any of the spheres that made the dots that were touching, which all the ones on the 6 were kind of canceling each other out. Once I had that figured out, I had all of my dots where I wanted them. I reset the depth of the dimple, and then copied them all back onto the screen, and I have the 6 die that I will need to build the image that I'm working on. I need 1 of each, red, white, and black, with the 1 on the surface, and 1 of each with the 6 on the surface. And then from there, I simply start building what is basically a 16-bit heart in a field of dice. It's basically just a pixel drawing, and it doesn't take all that much work to figure it out and make it. And I didn't want to grid it out too much and make them all perfectly in line. I wanted it to look like a person actually placed all these dice down. That's why there are spots where there are dice missing, and some of the dice are not completely level with the ones that are next to them. It's those little imperfections, I think, that make it look more realistic in the final render. I'm using the 1s and the 6s to slightly change the color of the overall picture. So like, if it's a 1, it's the bright color, and if it's a 6, it's what I would consider the shadow. So like, the 3 die that are making up the glare on the heart are 1s, but the ones around them where it fuzzes out a little bit on the edges of the glare, I used the 6s on those to try and make it look a little bit more gray than white. And the same with the shadow for the heart itself. Most of the heart is bright red, but then there's a small edge of shadow on one side, so for those I used the 6s to try and make them look just slightly darker red. I'm not sure how well it actually worked in the overall product, but you can tell that it's there, and it looked good to me. So as I go along, it's literally just copy, move, copy, move, copy, move, rinse and repeat. I'm sure there are easier ways to do it, and I'm sure there are definitely better ways to speed up the process of doing it. I don't know those ways, so I do it the way I know, which is copy, move, copy, move. As I start filling in larger areas, I just copy more of the die and make bigger blocks from which to copy and move around. My organization skills in each of these individual dies is insanely bad, and you'll see multiple times where I'm trying to get a bunch of them highlighted, and I'm having trouble finding the ones that I actually want to highlight because my arrangements are absolutely bonkers. But it doesn't take that long to figure out what you're doing wrong. Once you figure out what you're doing wrong, it's easy to correct that. And soon, I have the entire heart filled up. In order to add the shadow, I'm just going to remove a couple of the ones that I had already put in. It was easier to move them all into place and delete them later than it was to try and leave those spots empty while I was going through it. So once I have those deleted, I just grab a 6 die, and then I can start copy and pasting that and moving them to where I need them. If I get the chance to use a bigger block, I'll do that. I put down 1, I turn it into 2. I take those 2, I turn it into 4, and so on and so on. I'm sure it's not the most creative thing I've ever done, but it definitely got the look I wanted. When I first rendered it, it looked a little bland, and that's why I decided to go back in and add this white highlight, which I'm doing now. The white highlight is a secondary outline. So you have the heart, the black outline, and then you have the grayish white number 6 white die outline that goes all the way around that. The only real thing I have to worry about is objects touching. When objects touch, things go wrong, unless they're set up specifically with the mechanics of Cinema 4D. They have what's called, I think it's dynamics, and the dynamics tell it if it's a solid object or if it's a hollow object or if it's like a ghost and nothing can interact with it. And if I do ever want to do something with this, like animate it so that it looks like all the dice are just rolling into this position of this heart from off screen, I will have to add the dynamics to it later in order so that every object will interact with the ground as well as themselves, so that they, like, if one die bumps into another one, it's going to affect both of their paths. That's not being done today. Today we're simply drawing. We're just making the pixelated image that I'm looking for. Because the overall image that I was making ended up being a little sparse and it was hard to get a good angle on it and make it fill the screen, I decided to add this field of black dye behind it, and it was probably a little bit more extra work that I didn't really need to do, but I think it really added to the overall look of the final piece. And then from there, you know, it's just rinse and repeat until I have the field covered enough that it fits within the camera view that I'll be using to make the final render. And then, you know, I just set it and moved it around until I found an angle I liked, and from there I set it to render. The individual render for this piece took about 2.5 hours, which is a little time consuming when you render it out and the first time you get to see it you realize it's wrong, or that things are positioned like too far to the right, too far to the left, too far up, too far down, blah blah blah, and you have to move it around so you get it in the spot you want it and then render it again. This is the final render. I hope you enjoy it. I think it's pretty cool, but you know, let me know in the comments if you thought this was a fun video or if you'd like to see me try and make more stuff with Cinema 4D. I'm always looking to add new content, and there are some things I've done in the past that I might want to share with you if you guys were interested. So let me know, and maybe we'll do that. Thanks for watching. Bye.